I've been anticipating the Jujutsu Kaisen movie ever since I first learned it was going to be a thing. And after watching for updates and marking off days on the calendar, well, its North American release is finally here, and I saw the film, so let's talk about it. But just real quickly, before I get into the review, I want to remind everyone that I do have a Patreon now, and I know a lot of you are already members of the Patreon, but if you're not and you just want to check it out, see what's going on over there, well, there is a link in the video description. So, unlike the Mugen Train movie, the Demon Slayer Mugen Train movie from last year, I didn't go in to Jujutsu Kaisen 0 as an outsider. I've been looking forward to this one for so long, and of course, after seeing the Demon Slayer movie, I started watching a lot of anime, and after finishing the first season of Demon Slayer, the next thing that I jumped into, of course with my daughter Sophia, was Jujutsu Kaisen, and we talked all about season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen on the channel here, so I really understood the lore. I was really prepared going into this one. I felt like I was on such more solid ground than I was a year ago with last spring's big theatrical anime release. So I was really proud of myself getting into this movie, that I wasn't coming from way outside, and I might not mispronounce all the names this time. But I did have to go see this movie alone. My kids all had activities, or 2 of my 3 children had activities that they couldn't miss, track and some theater-related stuff. The youngest just didn't have any interest in watching the movie, particularly when I told him the showing that I was going to go see was subtitled. But I did say, you know what? I got to see this. I got to see it as soon as possible. So I'll go ahead and see it now, and then I'll see it again with them if they want me to take them. And when I went to buy the ticket, it was great. The guy at the ticket counter, he told me, I hope you know this is subtitled. And I thought, oh, of course I know this is subtitled. You're talking to Anime Dad here. And of course, he doesn't know what an anime dad is or who anime dad is, but I just had fun getting into it. I did kind of feel weird because I was like the one old guy all by himself in a theater filled with younger people, but everybody seemed to be having a good time. Everybody was just excited to be seeing Jujutsu Kaisen 0. People were like using their camera to take selfies with just the little like LED light up title of the movie outside of the cinema that it was in. It was great, and it was a good atmosphere, and I'm glad I went to see it. I do have to confess, from the get-go, before the movie got started, I was a little bit worried about a movie, a Jujutsu Kaisen movie, with no Itadori Yuji. You know, because I come to see Itadori as the central character from the anime, from season 1 of the anime, and I kind of really related to him, and I thought he was cool. So I didn't know how it was going to be when you take that main character out, but they did actually manage to keep your attention pretty quickly. They managed to handle the transition well, and in no small part, it is because we did have some familiar faces. Maki, Panda, and Toge, the 3 of them were in it, and we get to establish that they're in the movie from pretty early on, so that helps us have a little bit of a transition there. So even though we don't see Itadori, we do see these other students that we're familiar with and that we know fairly well, and they're a cool trio. They look just a little bit different. I guess they're 1 to 2 years younger. You know, this is a prequel movie, but the design changes are subtle. I didn't really notice them. I know some people maybe who study the animation and the art a little bit more, you may notice those changes, but overall, I thought that they looked comforting, I thought they looked familiar, and it really helped to ease me into a movie without who I consider to be sort of the main character. Also, no Nobara, who's another character I like, but it was a smooth transition because once it gets going, you don't really waste any time thinking about the characters who aren't there because you're compelled enough to follow the characters who are there. And at its core, this prequel movie is the story of Akotsu Yuta, the legend, the myth. I mean, we've heard him mentioned a lot in season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. He's like this greatest student ever. He basically dominated all by himself the sister school event. I mean, he's built up in our imagination to be like a giant who couldn't possibly live up to his reputation when we finally meet him. And this is the story about Yuta and how Yuta became the legend that's talked about. And of course, by the time we get into season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen, well, he's off on a special mission somewhere else, so we only hear about him spoken about. We never get to see him. We mainly hear the impressive feats as they're being described to Yuji about Yuta, so it's fun to finally see this larger-than-life character up on the screen and in real life, and to see, can he live up to his reputation? And I have to say, from our first introduction to Yuta, I was surprised at how vulnerable he appears. Now, of course, with storytelling tropes, shonen tropes, anime tropes. I shouldn't be surprised that it's a little guy who packs a big punch kind of situation, but still, I was surprised by how vulnerable he appears. He's the victim of bullying. He lives a very isolated life, very unhappy, and he's like given up. He's a child, 15 maybe, and like he's already done with life. He is borderline suicidal. He is willing to die at this point. And I was kind of surprised by how vulnerable he appeared when we get introduced to him. But the movie also gives us some insight into Gojo as a mentor. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on Gojo from the Jujutsu Kaisen anime, from season 1 of that. But I kind of thought everything with Itadori and Gojo was kind of a new thing for Gojo, or maybe a first time around for Gojo. But we get to see that this is kind of baked into Gojo's personality. Like he wants to save these doomed, lost people and make them into very, very valuable jujutsu sorcerers. And we do get to see his devotion here, and you get to see that, okay, this is a consistent character trait with Gojo. We get to see some similarities. We also get to see how this experience with Yuta turned him into the person that we see in his experience with Yuji. So I do like that. This is Yuta's movie first and foremost, but I would say it's also a movie about Gojo and the villain right behind that. And a couple things I noticed from the beginning, and then it evolves a bit as the story unfolds, but Yuta does have some similarities to Yuji. And at first I was worried maybe he was going to have a little too many similarities to Yuji, but that turns out not to be the case. But some things they have in common: they're both kind of bound to a curse. Of course, with Yuji, with Itadori, it's because he ate Sukuna's finger and then he's consumed a couple more. And so he's got that weird, uncooperative bond with Sukuna, you could say. And here, Yuta is bound to a very different kind of curse. And I don't want to spoil too many key details. I have some mild to moderate spoilers, but I'm not going to spoil too much about the nature of the curse that's bound to Yuta. But it's bound by a totally different mechanism than the binding of Sukuna to Yuji. But still, they both kind of have that interplay there that's a little bit interesting. Also, both Yuta and Yuji, well, they're operating in the Jujutsu Kaisen high school with a suspended death sentence hanging over their head. So it's a very, very similar setup scenario between the two. But there's also some key differences, which makes it fun, because we don't just want to see Yuta be Yuji with a different name or vice versa. So there are some key differences in the personality. I mean, it's striking because Yuta is such an introvert, and of course, Yuji, part of what makes him fun is he might be an extrovert to a fault. You know, this guy is outgoing, he's everywhere, he's confident, maybe more confident than he should be in the beginning of season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. But of course, Yuta, who has really every reason to be confident, totally lacks confidence because of some negative consequences of things that have felt out of his control that he hasn't learned how to control. And then, of course, there's a big difference in the physicality because, you know, Yuji is this tall, strapping young man who sets track and field records, and he can throw a shot put like forever. It seems like it never stops going when he throws it. Whereas Yuta is a small, diminutive person. He has a small personage. You know, he's not a big guy. He's the victim of bullying. I can't see Yuji having ever been the victim of bullying in high school. I mean, the guy's just too out there. I feel sorry for anybody who tried to bully Yuji. But Yuta, on the other hand, is the one who actually kills bullies, though it is unintentional. But I want to talk about the villain of the movie, because if this movie is the story of Yuta first and foremost, the secondary story that's most important to me is Gojo and Ghetto. And Ghetto is the villain of the movie. I noticed right off the bat, though, that there's a key difference in his appearance compared to season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. In season 1, he's got this scar around the top of his head, like across his forehead, that made me speculate maybe he had had a brain transplant, kind of half jokingly, and then someone in the comments spoiled it. Maybe that is what happened. I don't know. But here we notice that scar is missing. So I'm really, really curious, like, is this movie going to explain the scar on Ghetto's forehead? No comment. I won't tell you if it explains it or not. But I still don't know how it got there. Did I just spoil something? Sorry. Anyway, it also really looks into this relationship between Ghetto and Gojo that I really didn't know about at all from Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. And maybe it was all there and I'm just too daft or too dense, or I was caught up in the wrong storylines to pick up on it. But I really felt like this was all news to me. when we see Ghetto and we learn a little bit more about Ghetto. Because we learn about Ghetto's backstory, that he was a special grade sorcerer, one of like only 4, and he was kicked out. He was banned from the Jujutsu Kaisen High School, banned from the society or the organization. So what he has done is he's kind of founded his own school, and you can think of it as like an evil school. And I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, but Hogwarts always works as a good pop culture touchstone to use as an analogy or to make a comparison. So if Jujutsu Kaisen High is Hogwarts, well, Ghetto has went off and sort of made his own Voldemort equivalent of Hogwarts, or the Malfoy equivalent of Hogwarts here. And we do find out, like, I didn't know exactly what Ghetto's powers or the key to his sorcery is or was from Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1, but he can accumulate curses. He can take other people's curses, swallow them essentially, and he has control of them, so he's built this army of curses, and that makes him quite the intimidating foe. And he's on a mission. Once again, I'm going to kind of use that Voldemort Malfoy analogy here. My apologies if it doesn't ring true with you. But he's sort of on a mission to kill all muggles, is what I would say. Like, he wants to get rid of the non-Jujutsu sorcerer humans on Earth and just let the Jujutsu sorcerers inherit the Earth. He refers to the humans who are not Jujutsu sorcerers as monkeys, and that's a derogatory term he will continue to use throughout the film. But of course, Yuta, the weak, diminutive introvert, we know he has to become a hero. We know he has to become the legend. And we see that one of the keys to that is that he begins to find his strength through his friendship with Maki, which is interesting because we know Maki pretty well from Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. We know that she actually has like 0 innate Jujutsu sorcery ability. She's totally dependent on objects. By all definitions, she should not be allowed at Jujutsu Sorcery High School, Jujutsu High. She should not be considered a Jujutsu sorcerer, but she comes from a family of sorcerers, and she refuses to give up, and she's doing this out of spite. And Yuta, on the other hand, who day 1 is named a special grade sorcerer, he has all the innate ability in the world and no confidence. Maki has all the confidence and no innate ability. He forms a very special relationship with her, special friendship, looks up to her, and finds strength and inspiration from her. I thought that was really nice. And of course, a lot of Maki's backstory is addressed here, but we already knew that. Like, I feel like we got a pretty good explanation of who Maki is and why Maki is in the situation she's in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. So there weren't really a lot of meaningful revelations here, but I suppose they probably put that there so first-time watchers would be able to understand the importance of that relationship between Yuta and Maki. They had to establish, in case you weren't familiar with the manga or the anime, what her unique situation is, so you'd understand that they're sort of opposites, yet they can inspire one another. But having said that, even though this is a prequel and it does take place before the events of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1, it doesn't handhold explaining what Jujutsu sorcery is. It doesn't have some key exposition that you would get in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. I really think you'll be able to follow this movie a whole lot better if you've already seen Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1, but I can't say what it would be like if you haven't seen it because I don't have that outsider's perspective this time around. So if perhaps you watched Jujutsu Kaisen 0 without having read the manga or seen the anime, why don't you comment and let me know if you were able to follow it or not. But Toge, the cursed speech user that speaks the recipes for like salmon balls or whatever, he really gets his time to shine in this movie. And I gotta say, I feel like in Season 1, Toge didn't really get a chance to be the feature. He didn't really get put front and center of any scenes to my satisfaction, at least. I still had a lot of curiosity. I think the guy looks interesting. I almost said great, but I think the better term is interesting, with the like tattoos around his mouth and on his tongue and the cursed speech. And I never really felt like I got a good dose of Toge's sorcery in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1. So it's wonderful when we get to see it here. We also get to see the consequences of it. We get to see how he deals with those consequences. And of course, some other people observe what he does, and observing how he uses his sorcery and how he handles his sorcery, well, it does become important further down the movie, but I'm not going to say how or why. I don't want to spoil too much, but I'll tell you that if you're a Toge fan, you're going to have a stretch of this film that you really, really, really are going to love. And as I'm watching it and it's dark and we're dealing with curses, I kept thinking, like, why was this not a Halloween release? You know, this was released in Japan on Christmas Eve, and I'm watching this thinking this would have been a wonderful Halloween release. But then I start to understand why it was released on Christmas Eve. Just if you're interested, the climax of the film takes place on Christmas Eve. It's kind of like a night of 2,000 curses. Once again, don't want to spoil any outcomes, but I think that the trailer alone tells you there's a lot of action at the climax of this movie. And I think you'd be disappointed if you saw a Jujutsu Kaisen movie with anything other than a lot of action at the climax. But that climax does take place on Christmas Eve, which is, I'm going to assume, direct from the manga. So it is kind of cool if you were in Japan and you're watching these big battles in Kyoto and Tokyo, and you're watching this movie on Christmas Eve in Kyoto or Tokyo. That would be kind of cool. And like I said, we get some massive battles, and I already let it out of the bag. Some of it takes place in Tokyo, some of it takes place in Kyoto. So that means we also get to see those Kyoto school students, the ones that we saw in the Sister School event in season 1 of the anime. Some that I liked better than others, but it's cool because we know all of them. You know, I think I'm not alone in being a big Aoi Todo fan. So when we see Todo come onto the scene, it's just like, great, it's good to see him again. He's not featured for an extended amount of time or anything, but it is fun to see him again, to see Mekamaru, to see the little blonde sorcerer from Kyoto that looks like a witch up on her broomstick. It's great. We get to have a whole lot of fun with that. And we also get to see a whole lot of the faculty of both schools, faculty that we saw kind of sitting back and judging in the sister school event. Well, we get to see them out there fighting on the battlefield. We get to see the lady with the white hair who only cares about finances using her big battle axe, and it's cool to see her in motion. Of course, we get to see Nanami. You know, I'm a big fan of the 7-3 sorcerer, so seeing Nanami again with his blade and seeing him show what he can do. And I think we get to see new aspects of his sorcery, or aspects of his sorcery that I didn't see him use in season 1. Maybe he did use them and I just don't remember, but I'm a huge Nanami fan, and Nanami gets a real nice battle scene here. I mean, it's quick, but if you're a Nanami fan, it's delicious. And some of the evil sorcerers, a couple of the evil sorcerers that are working with Ghetto, and I don't like to call them evil, but they're bad guys, so I'll say bad guy sorcerers. Well, they are from a rural area, and we get to see a little bit of their motivation and why they went over to Ghetto's cause. And we get to see that it is not a pleasant experience being a Jujutsu sorcerer in a rural area. And their story to me was very reminiscent of Nobara's backstory from season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. And of course, I'm a Nobara fan, so I really like seeing that this is something that's kind of prevalent throughout the rural areas of Japan, and this is an element that could come into play with future stories. But it was nice having that little throwback to Nobara. And then Gojo, you know, Gojo the man, the blindfolded man, does show his eyes, or at least he shows one eye, and he has a great battle with the sorcerer from the Western Hemisphere. I don't know exactly where he's from. His name is Miguel, and he's dressed kind of flashy, so he could be from North America, Central America, South America. I don't know, but he's from the Western Hemisphere for sure. And as this battle is going on, and Gojo shows that Gojo is awesome. I mean, no, there's no question. We all know Gojo is awesome. But the guy he's battling is pretty darn skilled as well. And I start to wonder, like, is this the first time they've had contact with a sorcerer, a Jujutsu sorcerer from the Western Hemisphere? Like, is this something that they thought was more of a localized thing in Japan? Like, I wonder if there's going to be investigation on where this Miguel guy, where he came from, or what kind of group of sorcerers, because he talks about the sorcerers in his home country spent years making the weapon that he's using. And we know in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1 that Yuta isn't around because he's on a special mission to the west, I think. And I wonder if that might be the reason for Yuta's mission. Like, he's been sent to investigate this group of sorcerers that this Miguel guy came from. I don't know if that's where Yuta's going to be, because it isn't explained where Yuta goes by the end of the movie. You know, there's still that mystery left. But as the movie unfolds, it does follow, you know, certain shonen tropes, and we do get to see Yuta discover the full mastery of his sorcery, and the film explores some of the complexities of the curse that haunts him. And I don't want to say too much about that, but I'll just say it's complex. It's not exactly what it appears to be on the surface, and it's a beautiful exploration of it, and how he deals with it and comes to terms with it, I think is wonderful. I think more than one person might get a little tear in their eye as it all unfolds and happens. Some of you won't, but I really enjoyed it, and I enjoy complexity. It's a little, you know, it's not super twist or anything. You can kind of see where it's going. They don't really play it secretly, but it is really, really enjoyable to watch it unfold and to explore issues like love and friendship and isolation and togetherness, and it's really nice. Friendship gets a real interesting exploration here, which I think is a common trope for lots of action adventure comic books and movies. But one of the drawbacks to a prequel, because this is a prequel as I said before, but one of the drawbacks is you know that some of the characters can't die. In particular, I mean, we know that Maki, Panda, Toge, they're all around in Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Gojo's around in Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Geto, even though he's altered a little bit, is around in Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen, so we know that some of these characters can't die. That's always going to be a drawback with the prequel, as you know certain things that have to happen or can't happen. So that'll always be a little bit of a drawback, but I'll be honest, the story's told well, the animation's well, you get pulled into it. I really didn't find myself thinking too hard on that fact. And it's Mappa, and it has some solid Mappa art. You know, I think you can kind of set your clock to Mappa art for the most part, with the exception of Yasuke. But it wasn't necessarily elevated. I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't have an expert eye. Sometimes being on the big screen can both make it look more impressive or show its flaws more so. I didn't think it really did either one of those. I thought it was solid Mappa art, on par with Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen, but not necessarily elevated. Definitely didn't have any flaws that showed through on the gigantic screen. So I consider that overall a win. And as Jujutsu Kaisen likes to do, this movie also likes to do. And that is, it likes to live in various shades of purple, shades of purples that go darker and darker into blacks. And we definitely have a whole lot of that color scheme in this movie. It really makes you feel like you're at nighttime, which of course is when you're going to battle curses, when you're going to deal with ghosts and apparitions. It's going to be at night, so they have all the purples. The color scheme follows that of the anime very closely. It'll blend in seamlessly if they release it episodically, kind of tack it on to the series and packages on streaming platforms. And also it has that trademark cool Jujutsu Kaisen soundtrack. I always enjoy the Jujutsu Kaisen soundtrack because it's got just a touch of atonality, it's got just a touch of cacophony, but it's also really catchy at the same time. That sounds like such an oxymoron or a paradox, but I really enjoy the original soundtrack stuff that comes up with Jujutsu Kaisen from Season 1. The movie follows suit. The tone is really similar. Great, cool soundtrack, particularly for the battles. It really sets the mood. It sets the otherness and the coolness at the same time. Just a touch of just a hint of Matrix type effective soundtrack. And just like the anime, the movie has good tonal shifts in animation. It has appropriate doses of humor without it being too distracting. It really feels good to laugh at the times I laugh, and you get those tonal shifts when the laughter comes on you. You get the tonal shifts when you're seeing Yuta as a young child. You know, it looks like a different type of story. Suddenly it's bright, and it's the middle of the daytime, and you don't get those purples and blacks. So it has appropriate tonal shifts in the animation to help you feel the mood of the scene that you're watching. Compliments to that, I've always enjoyed the tonal shifts on this show. And most importantly, I feel like it answers a lot of questions, but it leaves some mystery. So the door is still open to explore this space a little bit more. So there could be more either episodic adventures or maybe another movie that takes place in what I'll call the Yuta era, the pre-Yuji Itadori era. So there's still story left to be told before we get to Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. So maybe they'll want to explore that space a little bit more. Maybe they won't, but at least the door is open. Maybe they can explore it in Season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen if they want to, or Season 3 or something. I don't know. Maybe Yuta will show back up at some point in the future and we'll find out what he was doing in these mysterious missing years, but I do like that that door is open so they have creative options. That's always nice to have creative options. And I'm also curious, like the fight at the end, I loved it. I don't exactly know how to rank it. Maybe I haven't seen enough anime fights. So if you've seen Jujutsu Kaisen 0, I would like to know how the big fight at the end ranks for you. Like, let me know down in the comments, how does that fight rank? Is it one of your top tier? Is it just middle of the road? I thought it was pretty good compared to the Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1 fights. I think it ranks equal to some of the Todo Itadori fights that they have against Hanami. Let me know what you think. But, you know, just in closing, I'll say this movie was a joy. I can't wait to see it again. I think I'm going to go see it again today and finally take my kids, probably watch the dub since I've already seen the sub. And most importantly, I hope that if you haven't seen it yet, you will go see this movie. I really want this movie to do well at the box office. I want it to carry over some of the success at the box office for anime wide releases that Demon Slayer found last year. And I know it might be an impossibility to hope it's as successful as Demon Slayer was last spring. It's got a lot more competition at the theater, for example, than Demon Slayer had, but it's already made over $100 million internationally before it opens in the US. So if it could maybe double that, I just want to see more wide release, more North American distribution rather than just special one-night only events or two-night only events. I don't know, would you like to see more of these wide releases? I hope so. It was distributed by Crunchyroll, which means it was distributed by Sony, so it got a great release. But with that, I'm just going to say I'm proud of you for watching anime, and I'll talk to you again soon.
I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. It really means a lot to me. If you might be interested in Patreon perks like early access to videos, uncut reaction videos, ad-free videos, and the opportunity to vote on which anime will be covered in the future, then click on the link in the video description. Thank you.